See, being from university, I also have a duty to perform as a host. Friends, welcome to this session. The very title of the session is quite interesting. That is the politics of inclusion and exclusion. Rather than explaining myself what we are going to talk in the name of inclusion and exclusion, particularly in the context of diaspora, because there can be various meanings about inclusion and exclusion in terms of policy framework, in terms of types of diaspora, the refugees, asylum seekers, whether they are excluded or included, or whether there are ethnic groups which are included or included, the way they play their politics. I have a list of 7 paper readers with me, but I understand that presently 5 are present and Nandini is conspicuously absent so at the time, but I think we'll take care at the discussion she can leave 1 or 2 papers. Since the time at our disposal is not even 2 hours, so I'll request all the paper readers to take about 12 to 15 minutes and should not cross the upper limit in any case. They are free to cross the lower limit if they so want, so that we have some time for discussion and also some justifiable time for the discussion. I'll speak only if required and if time permits. Otherwise, I'll behave more as a timekeeper and a moderator. And since the topic is very interesting, so let me start with Professor Badrul Alam, who is a professor of political science at Jamia Millia, a personal friend. He has been in many parts of the world, himself a part of diaspora at one time, and now talking about diaspora. So Badrul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Narayan Sahib, for your very warm compliments. And thank you to all the organizers, Professor Dr. Patnaik, Dr. Sadanand Sahu. It's great to be back here in IGNOU. I've been here a couple of times, and I'm really delighted to be here. The title of my paper is Joining the Mainstream Bandwagon, a study of political participation of Indian diaspora in the United States. Part of the reason why I chose this particular topic is I spent about 15 years in the United States as a graduate student doing my doctoral studies at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York from 83 to 88. And then later on I also spent a couple of years teaching in both New York State and also the state of Kentucky. So, and in course of that 15 years that I spent in USA, I also had the opportunity of taking part in a lot of the evolving and emerging Indian. I have also been following up this particular topic, which is of great deal of personal interest to me. To begin with, I think if you take some theoretical discourse, there are a lot of literatures about diaspora in general and also about Asian Indian diaspora in the United States in particular. We have talked about, we know about the contextualizing Indian American diaspora in the context of multiculturalism and cultural diversity. We also have read a lot of books by Ralph Waldo Emerson, James Henry, Gary Jussel, David Hollinger, etc., who talk about American society as a melting pot society, basically a vast white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture long time ago, and also the process, how the process of assimilation, acculturation, adaptation, how it took place and in what shape and in what forms. Later on, I think in the 50s and particularly in the 1960s onwards, there is another competing paradigm that came into the mainstream discourse was the concept of salad bowl. Okay? That it is not melting pot, it is not like one monoculture, it's like a combination of several cultures and it's like a mosaic. And there was a book I remember we all used to read, Beyond the Melting Pot by Nathan Glaser and Daniel P. Moynihan. And Joyce Millett, Milton Esman, Joseph La Palombra, etc. They talk about the salad bowl concept that American society is indeed a combination of a lot of the mini cultures. That's why if you go to cities like New York City or Chicago, you see little India, little China, little Philippines, little Greece, etc., etc. There is also another third theory which talks mostly propounded by Milton Gordon. He talks about cultural pluralism model. So basically it says that even if A lot of people try to stay within the mainstream American culture. At the same time, they also like to take advantage of the cultural benefits that the parent countries that provide them. So basically they like to ride in two boats and try to derive the maximum benefits out of that. And that particular theory is known as cultural pluralism. Talking about the Asian Indian theories in concern, there are scholars like Paramatma Saran, Baidyanath Verma, Manindra Mahapatra, Anjali Sahai, who is here, Peter Reeves, Rajesh Rai, who has also written quite extensively about different aspects, different dimensions, socio-economic dimensions, the issue of migration that we talked about this particular morning, and also the issue of first generation, second generation, third generations. Because if you know, most of the Indian immigrants in the contemporary times, they moved in the aftermath of 1965 landmark Immigration Act. Having said that, let me give you a little bit demographic kind of idea how things are standing now. As per the last 2010 population estimate, the Asian Indians or the Indian Americans, they constitute about 0.9% of the entire population. So if you say US population is like 280 million, and the Indians are like 2.7 million. So it is less than 1%. In comparison, I think the Jewish Americans have done some comparative study, 6.4 million, which is like 2.2% out of the, again, an absolute number of 280 million. But if you look more deeply in terms of how many engineers the Indians are, it's like 3.1% as of last year. So the population is 0.9% in terms of the engineers in high-tech industries and other industries. 3.1 are Indians. In terms of the IT workers, whether it's Silicon Valley and elsewhere, it is 7.1%. In terms of physicians and surgeons, it is 8%. In terms of the median income, and I have a statistic here as of 2007, it is $83,000 US, comparable to $55,000 for the whites and $61,000 for the rest of East Asia. 69% of Indians have college degrees, that contrasts to 51% for East Asian immigrants and 30%, just 30% for the white people. In terms of the upward mobility of the Indians, mostly I think they came in the 1960 onwards, particularly taking advantage of the Kennedy-Johnson Immigration Reform Act of 1965 that provided a lot of significance to the skilled people and the skilled workers. So 61 to 1980, in 61, there are about officially 9,000 Indians were there, but by the time it was 1980, 387,000 Asian Indians were there. By 1990, that number rose to 815,000. By the time it was 2000, it was 1.7 million. And by the time of last year, as I told you, 2010, it is 2.7 million. In terms of the Asian Indian political participation, I think when I was there in 1983, I remember in 1984 I went to a conference in Crystal City in Virginia, just outside the Potomac River, outside Washington DC. It was a big political participation, political organization. A lot of people came there. I remember one of the young senator I met and I had lunch with was called Senator Joe Biden from Delaware. Currently he's the Vice President of the United States of America. Paul Sarbanes from Maryland. Number of scholars came. Later on, of course, that number, they formed a congressional caucus group in both the Senate and also in the House. And that number is now increased to 115 in both the House and in the Congress also, including people like Senator Hillary Clinton when she was the senator, and many people all across the East Coast and the West Coast. I have also in this particular paper dealt a great deal with one particular organization called Indian American Forum for Political Education, and the kind of things that they have been doing particularly since 1980s. Just let me read very quickly. Preservation of immigrants' rights, particularly family reunification, how to encourage more quota from India for persons of exceptional ability, how to increase the more quota for under H1 category for skilled professionals, how the White House recognized these particular organizations into all the important meetings, successful congressional contacts, formation of Asian American Voter Coalition, AAVC, also how they tried to develop the voter registration drive all across America, and taking care of some specific segmented groups like healthcare professionals, hotel professionals, etc. Building a national network with other Indian American associations, and in particular how different organizations, particularly these particular organizations, IAFPE, Indian American Forum for Political Education, They try to strengthen Indo-US relations, working with Indian government officials in the embassies and in the other consulates all across USA, and working with American government officials, bipartisan liaison with political parties, support to Indian American candidates, and I have got statistics in my long paper where I have provided in the last 4 congressional elections, both in the House and also in the Senate, how much money the Indians donors have paid, tried to be on both sides. In fact, a paradigm shift has occurred like 30 years ago or 40 years ago. Most of the people, Indian origin people, they used to identify themselves as Democrats, thinking that the Democrats are mostly pro-India, they take pro-India legislations in the House, in the Senate, etc. But since the days of George W. Bush and also the senior Bush also, since then, a lot of the Indian organizations, they have been funding generously to both sides of the political aisle, both the Democrats as well as the Republicans. I have also dealt a great deal with the specific roles, objectives and functions of these particular organizations. Attitude toward media and communications, I have dealt a great deal about the different newspapers, journals and magazines. I can cite at least 2 of them. India Abroad and News India Times, I used to subscribe that, and there are now I think there are more than 2 dozens that is coming from different parts of USA, and that has been very influential in shaping the foreign policy and shaping the relationship between India and US. Not to speak about the radio, television, other different ethnic associations. You name one, Punjab Association, Odia Association, Andhra Associations, we have it. In terms of the specific electoral campaign, I have done some study in the last 3 elections, particularly the Clinton election of 1992 and 1996, the Bush Jr., George W. Bush election in 2000-2004, and the last election of 2008 of Barack Obama and John McCain. And you will see in the top 50 or top 20, there are at least 5 or 6 of them high-profile Indian Americans who are instrumental in both the campaigns, running from everything, arranging the logistics and arranging all the high-tech things. And some of them, they have also been rewarded for doing service to the campaign. For example, in the Obama campaign, Rajiv Shah was a very important person as a fundraiser. He has been appointed as the director of USAID, which is a very prestigious position. Huma Abedin, she was campaigning for Hillary Clinton while she was competing for the primary election. She is now a personal advisor to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Vivek Kundra, Rashid Shah, he is the representatives of the Obama administration to the OIC, Organization of Islamic Countries. So I can give you a lot of names like that. And in the 2012 election already, Obama, and also I just checking the other day, New York Times and Chicago Tribune, a lot of the leading Republican contenders like Rick Perry of Texas, like Mitt Romney of Massachusetts, they've also hired some very high profile Indian Americans into their particular campaign team. Ethnic associations I spoke about, and I also have dealt a great deal about how the different literary figures, particularly the NRIs, the Bharti Mukherjee, Jhumpa Lahiri, I don't like to go into details. Let me very quickly talk about the issues and challenges that the Indians faced. I think in this morning we spoke to, we heard from Dildar Singh from the Overseas Indian Ministry about the issue of OCI and PIO, and the issue of dual citizenship. That is a question of concern to the Indians, and the issues of Pravasi Bhartiya Divas and the Singhvi Committee report. Some of them has been implemented, some of them has not been implemented. The issue of the voting rights, who gets what. Of course, there are some legal implications on that one. Also, I think the issue how the NRIs or how the Indian Americans, they are showcasing the India's soft power. I think recently there has been a lot of literature on that one, and we have been reading a lot about theoretical stuff from Joseph Nye and also Shashi Tharoor, etc. Indians, these Asian Indians, can they be called quote-unquote a model minority, like the way we portrayed the first generation in the 60s? How this has changed or shifted in the last couple of years, I think that needs to be also discussed, and there has been a lot of literature coming along. And also initially, the Indians used to be concentrated only in some specific states, like New York, New Jersey, California, but now I think they are spreading quite across about 30 or 40 states out of the 50. Also how the issue of globalization, economic liberalization and privatization, how it is affecting the issue of migration that we just heard in the pre-lunch session. And when we talk about migration, the issues like brain drain, brain gain, brain circulation, brain recirculation, I think all the terms, reverse brain drain, that is also coming into the picture. Issue of lobbying in US politics, okay? And 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we didn't do any kind of lobbying. Now I think we have an official lobbyist paid for by the government of India to take care of our vital national interest in the US, and we saw that vividly in the case of Indo-US nuclear cooperation kind of things. And how the shape of future is going to come. I think we have seen in the cases like Nikki Haley or Nimrata Randhawa, the first women governor in the state of South Carolina, the Governor Bobby Jindal of the state of Louisiana, which also being, some people say maybe he will be a dark horse, maybe he will be a candidate for 2012 Republican Party presidential candidate, or at least a vice presidential candidate. So I think we'll see much more. In this, but I think one thing we should not forget is, at the state level also, there are a lot of Indian American candidates who are succeeding and who are also competing. And I have got a list in my long paper where I have got list of about 25-30 candidates. Out of that, 10 or 15 of them, they got elected. One of them, for example, Kumar Barve from Maryland, and I have interacted with him. He was elected 7 times consecutively in the Maryland State Assembly. Same thing with Swati Dandekar in Iowa and many other people.
So I remind you that let us not forget the time also.
Okay. So I think these are some of the issues and challenges that the Indian Americans are facing. So I think the future will tell us in the next 10 or 20 years how it is going to evolve. And the issue of reverse brain drain, and also the India standing in the world affairs. For example, let us say tomorrow if India becomes a member of the UN Security Council as a permanent member, how that is going to affect. So I think a lot of the issues, the global issues, regional issues, local issues, that is also going to affect one way or another. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Alam. Starting with inclusion rather than exclusion. So may I now call Dr. Samson Chiru. Take half a minute to introduce yourself and allow 1.5 minutes to present yourself.
My name is Dr. Samson Chiru. I'm from IGNOU, a researcher, and I would be discussing on the diasporic international relations, soft power, diplomacy. Just put up my okay. The paper basically deals with the Indian diaspora in the United States and how they have contributed so far to the home country. They were, in fact, today, quote unquote, the Burn Bridge has become an important bridge to access knowledge, expertise, resources and markets for the country of origin.
Can you speak in the mic, please, so that people can hear?
They spread along with them their culture and bridge the country of origin. People of Indian origin migrated from India during the colonial era. Indian diaspora initially was literally pushed to their backs against the wall in order to survive. Still, they decided to remain there and gain a social economic ladder. And later the bridge to come back to India was burned. That's why, quote unquote, the bridge was burned. So they remained there, grew in stature, and as I said, socio-economic ladder. Most of the countries, so is in United States of America. There was a mixture of people, some free passengers from India, who sang as traders, merchants, small businessmen, and construction workers. They took Indian entrepreneurship and traditional business skill with them. In the last 3 decades of the 20th century, the character of migration has begun to change, and a new diaspora led by high-skilled professionals moving to the Western world and semi-skilled contract workers moving to the Gulf, West and Southeast Asia emerge. India now has become not job seekers but demand-driven suppliers of these professionals. While Indians were taken over as indentured labor to far-flung parts of the British Empire in the 19th century, professional elite from this expatriate community has found its way to the United States, Canada, Australia and other nations of the West in the 20th century. In turn, these professionals gained new expertise in various fields also. It is also observed that the Indo-American community in the US has been found to be the most educated immigrant community in the US. It's been in recent upturn that they have a lot to do with the lobbying, which my predecessor has dealt quite at length. And during post-Indian independence phase, a large number of Indians went to the West and North America as skilled professionals. The emergence of significant diaspora has in recent years brought into self-focus too. First, there is a large expatriate population of skilled people from emerging economies. Second, overseas communities can constitute a significant resource for the development of the countries of origin. And there are in total estimated over 2 million Indian diaspora in the world, which Professor has talked about America, 0.9%. The overseas Indian community thus constitute a diverse, heterogeneous and eclectic global community representing different regions, languages, culture and faiths. And in every part of the world, the overseas Indian community is recognized for various reasons such as discipline, non-interference, and for successful integration with the local community. Overseas Indians have made significant contributions to the economy of the country of residence and have added considerable measure to knowledge and innovation. India wishes to engage, pursue, and promote dynamic Indian diaspora in a strong and sustained way to develop and project a coherent, intrinsically motivated and progressive identity, and our capacity to showcase in the sphere of tourism richness of Indian ethos, customs, traditions, culture, heritage for rewarding mutual engagement. Indian diaspora is the largest of South Asians, both in US and UK, and next only to China. Indian diaspora has roots in every country, the globe. And Indian diaspora could be found in 120 countries. So as I said, there are total roughly 25 million Indian diaspora in these 130 countries. Now the pertinent question is, can Indian diaspora play the same role in the economic transformation of India that Chinese diaspora has done it? And many scholars emphatically said yes. We see in a recent incident like the Gujarat earthquake, where Indian diaspora greatly contributed by way of relief fund and so on during Bill Clinton's. There are two types of poles apart next to each other. One, the United States of America's demand for skilled immigration to gather the needs of the proportion of the elderly in the rich countries like US. Two, the Indian immigrants are skilled ones, and apparently the demand will be met from India, thus giving rise dramatically an immigration to meet this challenge of their original home country, India. This process perhaps give a boost to both economies and polity of interacting nations. Further, as the reforms are still in full swing with the expectation running high for bureaucratic hassles to scale down in India, at least to the Indian diaspora they will be wooed and given some amount of investment opportunities. The rise of Indian multinationals capable of wooing Indian professionals abroad back to their country will only add to this process. The hiring, for example, of 20 out of 85 members of its drug discovery team from US and European companies by Randbeck C Laboratories a few years ago was one of such cases. Now, I have a small critique on the Indian about polity and other distributive injustices, because soft power has to do with all this stuff. So one of such is in religious front, where there is India's tolerance for different religions and cultures legendary, no doubt. India's spirituality is much needed in these days of conflict and strife. And we have what we call the world is one, and let there be peace in the whole world. These are the Indian philosophical civilizational principles. India's message of secularism, which actually means different religions coexisting in harmony with each other, rather than the Western concept of separation of religion and state. Then many scholars and knowledgeable people criticized when there was a Kandhamal episode of Christian atrocities, which I would not go in detail in those comments. Rather, I would go straight now because of the paucity of time. But one thing I would like to point out, there is a self-income inequality between rural and urban areas too in India. Now, soft power grows out of cultural milieu of society, and three things, that is culture, foreign policy and polity. And it is recommended that the Indian diaspora carry these three things wherever they go. That is culture. In culture we have there are all things being displayed there. We have a rich cultural heritage, even films, music, art, historical and cultural links. Then sporting culture we lack, need to improve upon. Then political values, democracy. Yes, we are known as the largest democratic country in the world with regular elections, but there is lack of participation, representing all from every section of the society. And there are unsettled problems in Jammu and Kashmir and elsewhere. These are also factors which is negative in a way in our soft diplomacy. And foreign policy, of course, Nehru said foreign policy is a non-aligned movement and it's a peaceful movement. It's going on and it is quite appreciated throughout by the world community. And there are various other recommendations being listed there, but I'm given only 2 minutes now, so I will not go in detail. I hope somehow we may get access to these recommendations too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sampson, and sorry for cutting you short, but chair has to perform all these unpleasant jobs. Next paper is by Dr. Renuka Thaplial and Dr. Vibha Arora, Being Tibetan in Shimla, Cultural Hybridity and Social Development of the Tibetan Diaspora. Just on Monday, Indira Gandhi National Open University also started a Center for Tibetan Studies. So we are also taking that cue. Keeping the limitations of time in mind, you can highlight the basic contents rather than... It's up to you.
I'll put in the slides on the the computer and I can't see them. It's like, can I just have a minute to put them on my pen?
Please, please.
Thank you so much. I'm Vibha, my co-author. Renuka was not able to come. She's just been transferred from Shimla to Kullu. So I'm presenting this paper on behalf of both of us. I'd like to first of all thank the organizers for inviting us to present this piece of work. I've been working on the Nepali and the Tibetan diaspora in the Eastern Himalayas the last 10 years, and it was really wonderful working with Renuka in Shimla over the last 2-3 years. We'll be looking at the Tibetan population which have been settled there. So this paper is an outcome of a survey and interviews that we conducted in Shimla city itself. Renuka is a lecturer in the college at Shimla. She's also doing a PhD with me at IIT Delhi. I have been working at IIT Delhi since 2006, and recently, the last 3 years, I've also introduced a new course on globalization and transnationalism. So this conference actually is a very welcome initiative, and I look forward to the Center of Diasporic Studies coming here at IGNOU as well. So here we are. The chief question when we look at diaspora, if you look at the presentations which have been made before, they've been largely for economic reasons, but the Tibetans are unique. It's a community which has accepted exile. The question then comes is exile preferable also? So flight in exile has impacted the Tibetans very differently. Approximately, there's no fixed number, but the range is somewhere between 122,000 to 130,000 persons who are living in exile, with more than 70% living actually in India itself. They're dispersed in South Asia, North America, and some have recently even migrated to Australia, Europe also in between. I'd just like to cite a quote from a very seminal work on the Tibetan diaspora. It begins with a statement: the Tibetan community in exile is one of the most resilient and successful refugee groups in the world. And in the foreword which was given by His Holiness Dalai Lama to this book, he says that they preferred embracing the hardships of living in exile over annihilation and immense suffering of living back in Tibet, which was occupied under the Chinese. When we look at the literature about Tibetans' experience in exile, especially which is related to India, they don't feel entirely displaced or uprooted or disoriented living in India. Since India is the birthplace of Buddhism, it's had a strong culture with a lot of communities working and close to Buddhist communities in Himachal Pradesh as well. They don't feel that dislocation. I mean, they do miss their homeland, but their kind of integration into India, assimilation, partial assimilation in India is radically different from the other refugee groups which have been studied in Africa or elsewhere in the Middle East as well. There's just a picture from the Tibetan refugee market, how it welcomes people to Shimla. This paper is located squarely in identity politics, in the debate on how identity is negotiated. It is generative, it's transactional. We look at various conceptual underpinnings of what are migrants, refugees, diaspora, how do we understand them? Do Tibetans themselves differentiate between being a diaspora or being a refugee as well? And the central fount of all this is the idea of the notion of the Tibetan national identity, which stresses itself on a particular lived geography, a history, a memory, and also a nostalgic desire to return to it. Now, when we look at the discourse on Tibetan imagery, we see that the dominant Shangri-La imagery. I've written extensively on this. I will not bring that thing out, but highlight two arguments given by Lopez Jr., who argues that Tibetans have become imprisoned by this myth of the Shangri-La, while Magnuson argues that this myth is also a soft power resource for the Tibetans living in exile. I will skip over the definitions of diaspora because I think it's been repeated ad random already. What is a Tibetan diaspora? It's not a homogeneous identity, it's not an imaginary, it's not purely an imaginary either. It's an identity articulation which focuses inordinately on the iconic holy figure of the 14th Dalai Lama as well. It's a transnational identity. And when we look at Tibetan networks, Tibetans living in Himachal Pradesh, like those in Sikkim, where I worked in Darjeeling areas, have over time developed strong connections with Tibetans who have immigrated to the United Kingdom, Europe, North America, and most recently to Australia as well. We locate our field research in Shimla. In the wider published literature on the Tibetan diaspora, it looks at Tibetan refugees in Nepal. They are economically a huge success story. Führer Hemmendorf has described the unique Tibetan renaissance in exile communities also. There have been several studies of Tibetan refugee settlements like Byalkup in Karnataka as well. But what is really interesting about this particular community is the fact that a refugee status affirms a consciousness of a distinct identity. It's also a tactical mode of their cultural production. The retention of refugee identity while living in India is equivocally an expression of their patriotism and modern nationalism as well. So unlike the other refugee communities which have been humiliated, which have felt denigrated, the Tibetan refugees are proud of their refugee status. It's a way of expressing their nationalism and commitment to the Tibet as a nation as well. We conducted a household survey in 2009 and 2011 July I went back and did some more work prior to submitting my paper to this conference also. About 50 interviews were conducted, intensive ones, and we covered about 220 members in these households through these 50 interviews. They've been done in 6 settlement colonies of Shimla. This is roughly the profile, the sample description of what we did, the age group, and most people who were interviewed or who comprised the population of Tibetan refugees settled at Shimla actually came in the first wave of migration in 1959 with His Holiness the Dalai Lama only. We elicited information about their occupation profile, their educational attainment, their living conditions, relative debt perception of their standard of living. It was a huge questionnaire. I'm unable to offer even glimpses of the conclusions of the study in the space of 10 minutes. So I'm just trying to deduce what are the things that we covered in that paper, which the discussant has a small part of it. And we hope to get 2 or 3 papers out of this study as well. Just a few pictures of the Tibetan market. When we look at their perceptions, the possibility of returning to Tibet, to their homeland for these exiled Tibetans is becoming remoter with time. It's given them a sense of crisis as well. The connections with the homeland become extremely important because when we talk about the diaspora, we also talk about the real and imaginary connections as well. For the elders, the homeland is a real place, while for the younger generation, Tibet is merely a utopian figment of their imagining. Both biographical memory and history, past and present connections, shape their relation with the homeland. About 59% of our respondents said that they do not have any close or distant relative or friends living in the Tibet Autonomous Region today. Half of respondents belong to the first wave of refugees who came into exile in 1959. About 3% of them reported to have family members in Tibet, while about 24% of them reported that they had some relatives in Tibet. These are people who came in the 1990s or so on. This is a picture with my colleague Renuka Thapia standing. This is a carpet factory in Shimla, which is into traditional handicraft manufacturing over there. When we look at the experience of living in India, there are 3 strands of arguments which come out. The first strand stresses strong cultural and religious connection between India and Tibet. India is the land of Buddha and center of the Buddhist faith as residents of His Holiness the Dalai Lama as well. The second strand stressed India's plural cultural traditions and high respect they enjoyed among Indians as a non-violent community living in exile within India. The third strand highlighted the high degree of freedom and political liberty they enjoyed in India while admitting lack of some socio-economic amenities which are not available to them because they are refugees over here. This is again some interviews happening in Shimla. On the right side you have a picture of one of the rallies which the Tibetans are organized in Lower Bazaar. This is the just a view of the bazaar area, the shops run by these Tibetans. Part of the reason they are happy in India is because to some limited extent the Indian government has allowed them to function through various kinds of, not just cultural organizations to preserve their culture, the religion, the monasteries, or promote their culture through education, but also to the political organizations which is happening in a very low-key manner, not in a very aggressive front, because the government of India does not want China to be angered at all this. But the people themselves mentioned that there are a large number of political and civil society organizations. They name things like the Tibet Youth Congress, the Tibetan Human Association, the Tibet Parents Community, Tibetan Shop Members Association, Dorak Choiki Khandok, the Tibetan Women's Association, Human Rights Association, TIPA, Tibetan Handicraft Society, Refugee Tibetan Youth Congress. There are a large number of organizations which are working for upliftment, for the welfare, for political rights, for ensuring that the issue does not die down but lives in the memory of people within that particular locality as well as on international level. In terms of the life experience, the refugees acknowledge the dignity of India in ensuring their economic and social welfare. We've given them land for resettlement, establishing, they're the only kind of diaspora, people living in exile, who've been offered, who are living in a spatially concentrated settlement also, where they've been able to recreate the Tibetan culture. And that's also one of the reasons why the Tibetan success story is spoken about very highly everywhere in the world. On the whole, excepting a few radicals who wanted greater political support and opportunities for organizing stronger and bigger demonstrations, most Tibetan refugees settled at Shimla expressed that they were grateful in that the Indian government is allowing them to preserve their culture. Culture becomes extremely important in this context, and there's cultural politics which is governing the relationship with the resident population as well. The generation differences between people who are wanting to return or yearning to be Tibetans living in Tibet as well. We detected three kinds of responses: optimism, pessimism, realism, and reconciliation with their refugee exile status as well. But I think what came out very strongly is in this particular statement which was given to us by a 22-year-old youth. My blood is Tibetan, but my homeland now is India. I've never been to Tibet, nor have I any desire to do so now. I now want to immigrate to New York, actually. So he knows as a refugee, he will not have full rights as an Indian citizen, although his blood, his education, in many ways he's become Indianized. But his future ambitions, the future geography of his ambition is not Tibet anymore. It is New York, it's North America, a land of opportunities for him. Whereas a refugee, he will have access to a lot of resources which are facilitated through the Tibetan diaspora networks. Our social research among the Tibetans confirms and supports insights offered by other studies that while Tibetans living within India have been accommodated, they really have been integrated or assimilated into the cultural context of their forced resettlement. They followed largely a strategy of what is known as limited acculturation. This is just another slide of the political movement which we witnessed in Shimla recently in July. Conclusively, cultural identity is constituted by particular processes, strategies and practices. Undeniably, what makes certain diaspora really diasporas is a self-mobilization around their awareness of themselves as the diaspora, the ability to imagine themselves as such and to construct appropriate discourses and devise strategies to perpetuate themselves as the diaspora. I will stop here. There's lots of meat, there's lots of data in the paper, and as the organizers have already promised us a volume, so look forward to your comments on the paper, and thank you so much for listening patiently.
Thanks for presenting such a comprehensive paper in such a nice manner and keeping time totally intact. I think the other people will follow your example. May I now request Dr. Manisha Tripathi Pandey. She'll be